Welcome back to Reading Bear. Today, we will take a look at some new revenge stories. And if you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comments. Let's go!
The first one is titled, "Fire Me for Protecting My Coworkers, Feel the Burn in Return." So this story is a few years old now, from my first year of varsity. I had started varsity and was doing a pretty hectic course in the medical field. As a child to a single parent who had not worked since I was 15, I obviously needed a job to cover my living expenses and what little my scholarship didn't. So I started working part-time at a bookstore in my local mall, as it suited my personality and I love books in general. The bookstore is one of those large-scale corporate chain types. The pay was as close to minimum wage as humanly possible though. So 6 months in, I am doing well and I get promoted to night manager. Duties involved managing the night staff, most of which are students like myself, and then 2 late 20 girls, both of which have kids. A week into my being night manager, a directive comes from head office saying that we are not making enough book sales and that we are obviously not trying. Now, to put it in perspective, this is around the time where Kindles and all the other type of e-readers were becoming popular, so naturally physical book sales had dropped radically. To remedy this fact, they were sending down a new store manager to take over, and our current store manager would take a minor managerial role. 3 days later, in walks the new manager, a short lesbian woman who hates men and is bipolar, henceforth referred to as bipolar witch or BB. Needless to say, I walk through to the back for our daily shift change meeting, where they introduce her. She greets us all and then asks all the managers to stay behind, so everyone filters out, leaving the 4 managers, myself as the night manager, the day manager, the stock manager and our previous store manager. So next thing, BB turns to me and asks me what the hell am I still doing here. I calmly explain that I am the night manager. She hears this and looks at everyone else to confirm this. Once they confirm the truth of my words, she looks at me directly and gives us the whole throwdown of how things around here are going to change. Nada. 6 months down the line, nothing much has changed. BB has been nothing but passive-aggressive to me and some others, and everyone has noticed, to the point where everyone in our store has a burning dislike for her. The managers get called in for a meeting where we get told the store is going to be closing in a week for 2 months for a revamp. I immediately ask why the short notice. The night staff all earn on a shift-to-shift basis. A week's notice isn't enough time to make alternative arrangements. BB flips out at me, saying that they don't matter and are easily replaceable. I point out that 2 of them rely on this job to feed their families and they can't live without this job. All the other managers stand with me on this point. BB then falls back and says we will pay them a base wage for 1 month and then hire them as painters. Now, my neighbor is a painter by trade and I know they earn at least twice what we are paid per hour. So I point this out, as well as ask if she is also going to pay for them to be trained. She then flips out at me further for being a smart aleck. Okay. Maybe I deserved that. Eventually she says that we will meet tomorrow to discuss her final decision. The time that she chooses though is 1.5 hours before my shift starts, and right in the time frame where I have one of my final exams. I point this out and an evil grin crosses BB's face as she says to me, if you don't make it in tomorrow, don't bother coming in ever again. A week later, I find out 3 of my co-workers on night shift were let go with no pay and told to reapply once the store opens. All those who had openly been friendly with me were told not to come back. This included both young mothers. This sends me into a fit of absolute rage. It's one thing to screw with me, but to mess with my co-workers as well, that's too far. I immediately phoned head office to complain and was completely ignored, kept on the line, switched from department to department. Eventually I had enough and sent in a detailed report to my country's Business Control Council, reporting the corporation rather than the store for bad business practice and unfair dismissal of multiple staff members. I then emailed the corporation's HR explaining what I had done and why. I informed them that I would change my complaint to the name of the store manager instead of the corporation in general if they found a way to rectify what they had done. It took 3 days before I received a response. They rented a smaller store for everyone to work at while the renovations were done at great expense due to the small timing window, and they had rehired everyone while suspending BB without pay until further notice. I immediately kept my promise and edited my complaint. Investigation was done and BB lost her job permanently with no chance of a reference, had worked for said company for 20 years. With a 20-year gap in her CV, it has been very hard for her to find a decent job. I saw her the other day working as a packer in my local supermarket. I realized I had forgotten to get sweet chili sauce and asked her please to get me a bottle off the shelf. Could not think of anything better to do as I had flu and really was not my sharpest, just wanted to get back to bed. She went off scowling but cannot guarantee she recognized me. This is what brought the story to mind. The next one is titled, Fix the Vote, Lose Your Jobs. I had a music teacher in high school that got let go for seemingly no reason. Many of us suspected that he was removed because the administration thought he was gay or bisexual, not sure if he was though. He later married a woman if I remember correctly. Back when I was in high school it was still difficult to be gay and stay a teacher. Because he got let go without an explanation and he was a much-loved teacher, a few of the students, including myself, confronted the administration about the termination both in private meetings and at a school board meeting. In all instances we were not given an explanation for the termination. I was young and probably did not understand the legality at the time. But in hindsight it makes sense that they said nothing. Fast forward a few months and at the end of the year there is a Teacher of the Year award that the students vote on. A few of us got it into our heads that we would campaign for the music teacher for Teacher of the Year to stick it to the administration and show our appreciation for a beloved teacher. As no one ever campaigns for Teacher of the Year awards, it was probably going to be easy to tilt it to one side. A few days later the award was announced and it went to a different teacher who was retiring. At first I was disappointed, but the more I thought about it the more it did not make sense. I did not know very many people that voted for the person that won the award. We had a small school so it seemed unlikely that they won. A classmate and myself did an informal poll and discovered that, at least according to the poll, the music teacher should have won by a landslide. At this point one other student and myself brought our findings to a handful of teachers we trusted. The teachers were irate, I mean completely livid. They all seemed to agree that this was not something that the administration should be teaching to students, that people can fix votes and cheat their way to a desired result. They asked us what we wanted out of the situation and we asked them to get the administration to apologize for fixing the vote. We confronted the guidance counselor and principal who allegedly counted the votes. They got very defensive, denied they rigged the vote and stormed out. That evening, my father, who happened to be a small-town lawyer, got a call from the teachers. At the time I was unaware, I learned about this later. The teachers had found the ballots in the dumpster in bags shredded. They were worried that their jobs were in jeopardy if they took the ballots, so they passed the ballots to my father to keep in legal trust. They got a group of people together and assembled enough of the ballots to prove that the award was intentionally given to the wrong teacher. The school board was provided the evidence that the vote was rigged. At this point the local news was involved. I can't remember when they caught wind of the situation, but I think the teachers got the news involved at some point to protect their own jobs. The guidance counselor and principal both got indefinite leave without pay and edit smiley face. Quit when they realized they would likely be terminated. All because they refused to apologize to the students for lying. The one downside to this all is that the guidance counselor's kid was a classmate of mine and a very nice kid. I still regret how the situation may have impacted him. As I grew up in a small town, to this day my father and their family are not on speaking terms because he had held those ballots in trust. The whole situation seems absurd. That people would fix a meaningless award to a teacher, and that people would get fired for it was well beyond the world I knew prior to that time. The next one is titled, A Temp I Barely Knew Was Actively Trying to Get Me Fired Behind My Back. So, we had a temp covering maternity leave that turned out to be a bit of a nut job. She was EA to Deputy CEO and seemed to think this gave her some sort of status. We'll call her the temp. I'd spoken to her twice, maybe three, and was incredibly nice. I make it my business to be nice to everyone. What she didn't know is that from about a week after she started I knew she was sending daily complaints, all unfounded and untrue, to my manager about me. My manager and I get on socially and professionally and he was dumbfounded by her doing this. I still have no idea why she did it to me either, and until today I'd put her out of my mind. We are talking 3 or 4 complaints a day and asking for stuff to be taken further, and why wasn't I getting warned, reprimanded, whatever? What set our alarm bells ringing though was one day I was leaving early and asked her to cover something that afternoon in person, to her face. She was nice about it and said no problem. I have flexi hours and get lots of time in lieu, so I'm not always there 9 to 5 like other staff. Often I'm there late or on weekends, so I have hours built up and let my boss know I'm cashing them in. We have an unusually complicated leave system and neither of us wants the paperwork, so I always need to clear when I work them and when I take them. We keep our own record. On the day in question I rang my boss, told him I'd spoken to her and she was doing whatever it was for me. My boss rang me that afternoon and said she'd come in asking where I was and who was going to do the job she'd agreed to cover me for. She denied we had a conversation and then she complained about my hours, saying I hadn't been there for hours on end and making up days I wasn't there. We had a record of that, of course. He explained the nature of my job meant I often wasn't at my desk and am available on a company mobile that she could ring anytime. She deemed this wasn't enough and basically tried to have me report any time to her where I'll be and for how long. This is a temp, not even the CEO expects me to do this, so why does some barely aged 21 and not full-time or in my department expect it? When she left, my boss called the person sitting next to her who confirmed I had spoken to her. We knew we'd have to watch her. Here's where the actual downfall started. In work we supply long life milk only and coffee. Everything else belongs to staff, this is widely known. It was told to people explicitly on their induction, by me. Don't take other people's stuff, what's in the shelf marked staff you can have, share. I order all of our supplies, office and tea coffee for staff and conferences, so the few emails I would get from her would be complaining about all the stuff she was using was running out and not being replaced. I would let her know it was mine, she could use a bit but to get her own. I can't stand long life milk, so I always bought my own fresh milk. Unbelievably, this will be relevant later. It kept going and got worse. She even took a few microwave diners on me. Others were complaining about their stuff walking too. The complaints from her continued and I'd reply, always, by email and say the same thing over and over, but no, I was wrong. Staff were to be supplied with the items she mentioned and I had to replace it, and she would be forced to tell her manager if I didn't do it. I told her, by all means tell your manager. I always ask people to give any complaints they have about me to management, as I can justify them or explain why something won't get done. Of course she never went to her manager, she just kept sending more and more emails in secret to my boss and now others, with her making up conversations we'd never had and doctoring emails. Yeah, it was getting to this stage. My boss would come over with staff member a printout every time and I would show him my original email replies given I never knew when she'd email. This was further proof I was telling the truth. He trusted me, but the independent staff member was us doubly covering our asses. We decided to mark what server tapes we used for the backup that day so we could retrieve at a moment's notice if we had to. We made note of it all, including incorrect timelines and false claims, and all false emails were verified by other staff to be untrue. We then just pretty much ignored her constant complaints. Her boss knew what was going on and admitted to ignoring the stuff she was doing and said to me and my boss to her, ignore the temps' complaints too. Other staff was now reporting her increasingly odd and vindictive behavior, and the deputy CEO apologetically said to my boss and I and several others to ignore the temp, as she was desperate to not have to rehire when she had 2 months left until her usual EA was back from maternity leave. I'm a big boy and with management's blessing we just ignored the lunatic. If you're thinking the top managers in this place are crap, you're right. I'm riding this job out until my wedding is paid for and I'm out. So none of this really affected me. I just didn't want to lose to a moron at this point. I knew she was building to something, and at this point I wanted to see her go down in flames. Anyway, in a horrible twist of fate, her boss unexpectedly had to go on personal leave pretty much indefinitely and a replacement was rushed in to cover her. Then, like 2 days later, the bombshell dropped that the original EA wasn't coming back and the temps was offered a new short-term contract until a new replacement was found. Thankfully this wasn't an extension but a brand new one, so she was on a 3-month probation again. Now the new deputy CEO didn't know the lay of the land and the temp was ramping up her operations looking for the now permanent job. With her old boss out of the way, she was now including her boss in backdated emails addressed to my boss and I, as if I'd been part of the chain the whole time, ramping up the complaints to give off the impression that she is just banging her head against the walls with us doing nothing she asked. Now we knew, with the increase in complaints and her increasingly hostile behavior to me behind closed door, we lined our ducks up. We basically had a running record, so we killed her with kindness and waited. The day came and she struck. Would you believe it? It started over milk. Even though I'm getting older and should know better, I love milk. I'll have a glass with my lunch, often more. Don't judge, it is what it is. Anyway, she is in the kitchen and I take my milk out of the fridge to take to my desk. As I'm walking out the door I get, "Don't you think it's rude to take it all? Maybe some other staff might like to use that." I was having a bad day and had enough of this ducking minge bag, so I basically said she was too stupid to read emails, so I'd tell her again it wasn't for staff. "We'll see who's stupid," she replied, walking out the door. I texted my manager and said D-Day had landed. Sure enough, an hour later the HR person comes in. We outsource HR, and didn't even say hello to me coming in. She always swung by my desk. My boss has kindly printed out everything and is ready to bat for me. I play dumb when I am called into the room. The new deputy CEO has a thick file that the temp has compiled, and she basically starts grinding her axe about all the terrible stuff I've done to her, referring to the files, times and dates and whatnot. Now, given the deputy CEO doesn't know me from Adam and the HR person doesn't deal with us day to day, they are buying the damsel in distress act. When I was asked to defend any point I didn't, I said I wanted every complaint read out, and once we'd gotten through every single thing she wrote, would I then put my case forward. They certainly thought this was strange but obliged me nonetheless. We were there for about half an hour. The temp is crying at how badly I have ignored her and how was it the company and my boss have allowed this treatment of her to carry on. It's getting hard to sit through this absolute character assassination, but I do it. They wrap up and I am asked to explain myself. I ask for my boss to be present and that I have 1 or 2 emails that can clear this up quickly. In walks my boss with a stack of everything we'd kept. Her edited emails, mine between my boss and I, my time records, my job lists and logs, and even some invoices proving complaints she'd made about stuff not getting done was lies, wrong. I then said if that wasn't enough I also could provide the list of tape numbers from the backup that could prove my emails were doctored by her, and also the list of staff that were present with my boss when he compared them. Then I finally showed various emails between the deputy CEO and I outlining what was going on. The Dep CEO and HR lady just looked at each other and said I wouldn't be needed anymore. The temp's tears changed to hysteria. She was livid, calling me a liar and that I was only doing this because she'd rejected a pass I'd made at her. Then it became that all the staff hated her and it was a big conspiracy to get her fired. She then tried to provide times and dates of when staff members had done social stuff without her and she was being excluded and harassed. She went on screeching for probably about an hour with anything, you name it, about how the staff and I in particular had ducked her over and that she see us in court. How anyone could have felt so victimized was actually scary to me. We're relatively small, and while I'd be the first to admit the staffs here aren't my best mates or anything, they are pretty nice people. This is a nice workplace. This nutjob made it sound like she was the plucky Cinderella of the story, getting bullied by the ugly stepsisters. The last I saw of the temp was as she was marched to get her phone and her other crap at her desk and straight out the door as she wailed like a banshee. Today she rang looking for a reference. She won't get it. I don't care about my managers not doing their job, as I don't plan on being here in 6 months' time. They are paying for my wedding and I'm going to bounce. If you read all that, thanks. To the temp, duck you, I win. The last one is titled, Throw a Book at My Head? We'll see who has the last laugh. So this happens back in freshman year of high school for me, about 20 years ago. Little bit of a backstory, I was born with neurofibromatosis, a genetic condition that causes tumor growth on nerve endings and a large list of other problems like early onset puberty, blindness, epilepsy, death etc. I had this teacher who, if you called her an ancient old hag, you'd be being polite. For whatever reason she had it out for me. I can only pin it down to her being a bully. Now I had been sick because of my medical condition and had action plans with the school as to not fall behind. The teacher knew of my condition because of this. So one day I come into the classroom and there's a depiction of me on the whiteboard with the words, "Tumor boy," above it. The teacher just shrugged and laughed. She had disclosed my medical condition to the entire class. I tell the principal, nothing. The guidance counselor, nothing. My parents? Nothing. Nobody believes me. It's my word against hers, so for now I let it go. I'm very patient, so I know I'll get another opportunity. Another incident, she hits my hand with a ruler when I ask her to stop taunting me in front of the other students. My medical condition is nobody's business but my own. She tells the class I have brain tumors, which is why my head is so large. She also points out that I have the in my feet again disclosing private medical information just to be a vile person. I again go through everyone, again nobody believes me. So then I get a mild case of the flu, and miss about a week of school, so I ask if I can bring a recorder to school to tape lessons to catch up. It's immediately put in my file. For whatever reason she missed this meeting, still it's in my file, so she should know about the agreement. So now I know if she acts like a rancid witch again, her butt is mine. All I need is bait, which pretty much just takes me showing up. The very next day at school I'm sitting in class with the recorder taping in my bag, and she starts with her daily routine of asking someone to draw a picture of me and all my tumors on the whiteboard. I again ask her to stop, and this is where the book is thrown at my head with a loud thud, followed by a profanity-filled tirade about how terrible of a child I am. It's at this point I stop the recorder, and tell her exactly what I think of her, and am then physically removed from the class and taken to the principal's office, and I'm expelled. Once I got home is when I showed my parents the tape. Within 20 minutes we are back at the school playing it for the principal and vice principal, threatening legal action. Needless to say, my expulsion is lifted and she is fired on the spot just before retirement, losing her retirement money. She even called me after and asked, "Why are you doing this?" I simply told her she did it to herself and hung up. Thanks for listening.